Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Although the chaos had been brought under control, there was no way that the angered soul cultivators would simply disperse. Their gazes flitted back and forth between Bai Xiaochun and the ruined shops of Sima Dao and Sun Yifan. Clearly, if Bai Xiaochun hadn't been there to interfere, the mob would still be attacking those two shops. Despite feeling nervous and a bit guilty, Bai Xiaochun shouted, "Listen to me, everyone. I, Bai Hao, guarantee that I will get you the explanation you deserve. Fellow Taoist Bai, we are not at fault today. It's them, Sima Dao and Sun Yifan. That's right, those two shameless fellows sold us counterfeit soul medicine. The embarrassment we have endured today must be avenged. It's good that you're here, fellow Taoist Bai. We'll follow your lead as you resolve this issue." The soul cultivators all knew that although the riot hadn't affected a very large area, this was Arch-Emperor City, and if things went on for too long, the city guard would definitely arrive at some point. Although they were all furious at Sima Dao and Sun Yifan, they gritted their teeth and forced themselves to remain calm. Some of them even wondered why the city guard hadn't arrived already. After all, every borough was overseen by a contingent of city guards, who were responsible for keeping the peace. However, not a single city guard was visible. "Don't worry, everyone. I, Bai Hao, as well as the other fellow Taoists at my side, will ensure that you get your explanation." He even thumped his chest in emphasis. The other shop owners and employees who were with him acted similarly. Seeing that the crowd had calmed down left Bai Xiaochun feeling quite relieved. He had worried that things had gone overboard, and that it would result in misfortune. But now, he was the one the crowd expected to render judgment, something he found to be outrageously ironic. With that, he called out, "Fellow Taoist Sima. Fellow Taoist Sun, please come out for a chat." In response, Sima Dao and Sun Yifan emerged from the rubble of their shops, unsightly expressions on their faces. Although they both had profound cultivation bases, there had simply been too many enraged and maddened soul cultivators to deal with. Before either of them had even been able to react, their shops were destroyed. Therefore, not only were both of them angry, but they also cast piercing glances at Bai Xiaochun. "Bai Hao," Sima Dao said, "the soul medicine they're talking about has clearly been tampered with. Give me even one portion, and I'll bring the truth to light." "As for who the true culprit is," Sun Yifan said coldly, "we'll figure out soon enough, and announce it for everyone to hear." These two necromancers had been brought there to put Bai Hao in check. Therefore, this turn of events left them feeling very unsettled. At the same time, they couldn't help but harbor some suspicion that Bai Xiaochun was actually the one behind it all. And yet, if that was true, they still couldn't imagine how he had managed to alter the soul medicine in the way he had. However he had tampered with it, there was no way he could have done it without leaving evidence. They were both sure that they could find the clues. After exchanging a glance, they both confirmed their mutual intention to drag things out until Zhou Hong arrived. In fact, they had both contacted Zhou Hong as soon as the incident began. He was the reason the city guard hadn't appeared. Considering how things had gotten out of hand so quickly, he didn't want to get implicated. Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times, mostly in admiration of his apprentice's intellect. After all, everything he was doing right now was according to Bai Hao's plan. In the heat of the moment, he had been given no other choice than to go with that plan, and now that he was seeing the results, it caused his eyes to shine. He had quickly gone from being in the passive position to being completely in charge of the situation. Furthermore, he was now in a position to decide the fate of the reputations of Sima Dao and Sun Yifan, all with a single word. Having reached this point in his train of thought, his heart began to pound with excitement. However, he kept a very somber expression on his face. "Fellow Taoists, the two of you are necromancers, and therefore, I believe you. There's no way that soul medicine concocted by necromancers such as you two would cause such outrageous side effects." Sima Dao and Sun Yifan were clearly shocked by how firmly Bai Xiaochun seemed to be standing by their side, and both of them immediately felt as if something fishy were going on. The other soul cultivators in the area began to stir, and even shout out angrily. "What do you mean by that, fellow Taoist Bai? You believe them? What, you think we're stirring up trouble for no reason?" Bai Xiaochun immediately waved his hand to interrupt the shouts of the crowd. "I also believe the rest of you," he said loudly. "You wouldn't have come here for no reason at all. Please, allow me to tell you how I truly feel. Although I know how things ended up, I don't know why they happened. All of you say that you consumed soul medicine concocted by these two Grand Masters, which was what led to the various incidents. Does anyone have one of those portions of soul medicine that I could examine?" His words seemed to pacify the crowd for the moment. Then, a middle-aged cultivator snorted coldly and tossed out a portion of high-grade soul medicine. Bai Xiaochun caught it in his hand and then peered down to examine it. After a moment passed, he frowned and looked up at Sima Dao and Sun Yifan. Fellow Taoists, the two of you definitely outrank me in terms of necromancy. Pray forgive my ignorance, but I really can't see any signs of tampering. With that, he handed the soul medicine over to Sima Dao. Snorting coldly in his heart, Sima Dao took the soul medicine. He had heard earlier that the cause of the disaster was his own soul medicine, but hadn't been able to get his hands on one of the offending portions. After taking it, his eyes shone as he began to examine it closely. However, as the moments ticked by, his eyes widened, and his heart began to pound. He even performed an incantation gesture, drawing upon the power of his cultivation base to perform a very thorough investigation. After all of that, though, he was unable to identify any problem areas. Soon, beads of sweat began to pop out on his forehead. Furthermore, he could tell that this soul medicine really was the work of his own hand. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't find any traces of tampering. Slowly, he began to pant, and his heart began to quiver with a sensation of profound foreboding. Sima Dao's behavior was also getting Sun Yifan nervous. In the end, he grabbed the soul medicine and used his own methods to examine it. Soon, his face turned just as ashen as Sima Dao's, and a look of incredulity could be seen in his eyes. Impossible, Sun Yifan thought. This soul medicine really was concocted by Sima Dao. But I don't see anything wrong with it. There's plenty of soul power inside, and it seems completely stable. Don't tell me that this is just an ordinary portion of soul medicine, and they're intentionally using it to try to fool us? Having reached this point in his train of thought, Sun Yifan prepared to speak, and yet, was beaten to the punch by Bai Xiaochun. Fellow Taoists, I wasn't able to find anything wrong with that portion of soul medicine, nor find any traces that it's counterfeit. In fact, I suspect that it is just an ordinary portion of medicine. I think we need to perform a test. As soon as the words left his mouth, Sun Yifan chimed in. That's right, this medicine is definitely not counterfeit. Sima Dao's eyes glittered. He refused to believe that a portion of soul medicine that he had concocted could be tampered with without him being able to tell. The only person who could possibly do something like that would be an earthly necromancer. And yet, if an earthly necromancer really wanted to cause problems for him, he wouldn't need to do it in such a complicated way. An earthly necromancer could have him expelled from Arch-Emperor City with a single word. With such thoughts on his mind, he looked at the soul medicine again, and then pointed at one of his shop clerks, a young man he had brought with him from 9 Serenities City. You test it. The clerk hesitated for a short moment, then walked forward and took the soul medicine. After taking a deep breath, he sat down cross-legged and then began to absorb the soul power from the medicine through his palm. With so many people watching him closely, there was no way he could pull a fast one in this situation. Everyone simply waited to see what would happen. Before long, the clerk opened his eyes, and the soul medicine was completely absorbed. As he rose to his feet, he seemed completely normal, leading Sima Dao to breathe a sigh of relief. Then he opened his mouth to speak when, all of a sudden, a loud fart erupted into the open, followed by a cloud of foul gas. All of the soul cultivators present who had been affected earlier immediately erupted into howls of rage. So that soul medicine is defective. What were you just about to say, huh, Sima Dao? Sun Yifan, you and he are both completely out of line. Impossible, Sima Dao blurted, his face draining of blood as he staggered backward. This is impossible. I checked it myself. There were no problems. However, he was at a complete loss as to how to defend himself. Sun Yifan was physically shaking, and knew that the game was up. He and Sima Dao had been thoroughly defeated, their soul medicine really was defective. Bai Xiaochun shook his head silently, seemingly at a loss for words. As for the other shop owners and clerks, they all began to sigh. The shouting from the crowd began to grow more intense. All right, Sima Dao and Sun Yifan. We have proof now. You'd better compensate us for all of this. Give us our compensation, otherwise, we won't let you go even if you call for help from the Arch-Emperor. Once this story gets out, everyone in the Wildlands is going to know that Sima Dao and Sun Yifan are knaves through and through. Sima Dao and Sun Yifan were so nervous they were sweating rivers, when, all of a sudden, a grim voice cut through the shouting of the crowd. I, Zhou Hong, will provide the compensation. Along with the words came a beam of light, slicing through the air. It was none other than the heir apparent from 9 Serenities City, Zhou Hong. He wasn't alone either. He was flanked by dozens of henchmen, as well as a group of several hundred cultivators wearing black armor. The black-armored soul cultivators had expressionless faces, and completely ignored everyone present as they spread out in the area, performing incantation gestures as they set up a spell formation. As soon as the spell formation was activated, a massive gravitational force appeared, which immediately sucked away all of the foul gas in the area. The sight of the gas vanishing filled the other soul cultivators in the area with complete shock. The heir apparent of 9 Serenities City, it's Zhou Hong. The truth was that Zhou Hong was actually feeling very nervous. Even the smallest incident in Arch-Emperor City could have profound implications outside. He might be an heir apparent, but that didn't mean he had the luxury of letting his guard down. After all, relations between the 4 heavenly kings weren't very good at the moment. At the moment, it didn't matter whether or not Sima Dao and Sun Yifan were truly responsible for what was happening. The soul medicine had their mark on it, which meant that they couldn't extricate themselves from the situation. Furthermore, neither could Zhou Hong. The truth was that Zhou Hong was even more worried than Bai Xiaochun was about things getting out of control. After all, this was Arch-Emperor City. In his anxiety, he had called in some favors to stop the city guards from getting involved. After all, once they did, it would be impossible to prevent reports from going up the chain of command. That didn't mean that a lack of a report would keep the matter hidden. However, once someone did report the matter, formal action would have to be taken. After ensuring that the city guard would wait a bit before taking action, Zhou Hong quickly came over with members of his father's own personal guard, who used a powerful spell formation to get rid of the foul gas. It had been a lot of things to take care of in a short time, and he was feeling extremely frustrated about the matter. However, there was nothing he could do. As soon as he arrived on the scene, he called out, "It doesn't matter how all of this happened. It was probably just a mistake. Don't worry, everyone, I will provide compensation that will surely leave you feeling very pleased." Immediately, his henchmen spread out and started taking care of everything. Those who had been directly affected by the soul medicine were given handsome compensation, and actually ended up profiting quite well. Furthermore, everyone understood that this hefty remuneration was also a way to buy their silence. The other soul cultivators who had been affected by the disaster were also given compensation, and although it was less than what the actual victims received, they were all very satisfied. As for Zhou Hong, although he was loath to pay such a heavy price, he really had no other options. Bai Xiaochun watched through narrowed eyes, unable to hold back his admiration for how quickly Zhou Hong had taken care of everything. Apparently, Zhou Hong was even more nervous than he was about causing a larger disaster. After seeing how happy everyone was at the compensation, Bai Xiaochun looked up in thought for a moment, then cleared his throat, lowered his voice, and spoke to the other shop owners behind him. Our shops were damaged too. The shop owners all began to grumble and then complain aloud. Not too far away, Zhou Hong's heart felt like it was dripping blood as he forced himself to calm down. Gritting his teeth, he waved his hand, sending a person over to Bai Xiaochun and his group to discuss the matter. Before long, a bag of holding was given to Bai Xiaochun. At this point, everyone felt very pleased, although Bai Xiaochun was feeling a bit guilty. Considering how badly everyone had suffered, he took his own share and began to distribute it among those who had been directly affected by the soul medicine, leading more and more people to cry out his name in admiration. The smiles on the faces of everyone in the crowd sent stabs of pain into Zhou Hong's heart. Never could he have imagined that his little scheme against Bai Xiaochun would not only fail, but also cause great injury to himself. Well, at least things are all worked out now, he told himself comfortingly. He was just about to open his mouth to speak to the crowd when he saw all of the soul cultivators who had been given compensation rushing over to clasp hands to Bai Xiaochun. "Grandmaster Bai, many thanks to you for taking a stand for justice. You're a great person, Grandmaster Bai. Fellow Taoist Bai Hao, I owe you a big favor for what you did today." They weren't the only ones to react in such a way. The shop owners also clasped hands and offered expressions of gratitude. Moved, Bai Xiaochun immediately announced that everyone present could have a discount the next time they came to his shop, which made people even more happy. Zhou Hong was the one who actually gave out the compensation, but the person everyone thanked was Bai Xiaochun. It left Zhou Hong's mind spinning, and he simply couldn't control his emotions. Profound hatred for Bai Xiaochun immediately blossomed in his heart. Unfortunately for him, he could only wrestle it into check. After all, he didn't want to dig himself further into a pit. After a long moment, he simply left. And thus it was that the incident with the foul gas was resolved. Bai Xiaochun stood there looking at the crowds dispersing, his hands clasped behind his back. Then, feeling very pleased with himself, he walked back into his shop, musing that his apprentice's plan really had been amazing. Beautifully executed final move, he said, laughing heartily and giving Bai Hao a look of praise. Bai Hao felt both embarrassed and pleased. After all, his master was the only family he had, and his approval left Bai Hao feeling wonderful. Bai Xiaochun spent some time bragging and boasting, then went into the back room, very pleased with not only having avoided disaster, but also coming off with a bit of profit. Savoring the victory, he took out the formula for 17-colored flame and continued his work with it. 3 days passed by in a flash. During that time, Zhou Hong was run ragged dealing with the aftermath. He spread bribes high and low, and put out fires left and right. When everything was said and done, nobody came looking to ask questions. It was on the evening of the third day that he finally called Sima Dao and Sun Yifan over to discuss the matter. After the three of them were seated in a locked chamber, he grimly asked, "Did you find out what happened? Was it Bai Hao?" Sima Dao and Sun Yifan didn't say anything at first. A moment passed, and then Sima Dao braced himself and bitterly said, "The two of us used every trick in the book. We even asked for some help from some fellow experts we know. We really can't find any signs that the soul medicine was tampered with." "No signs at all?" Zhou Hong replied angrily. "Then what's wrong with it? Don't tell me the two of you really are responsible." He wasn't being polite at all. Normally speaking, if he had spoken like this, Sima Dao would have been very displeased and would have immediately rebuked him. After all, he wasn't a mere counselor to the Nine Serenities King, he was a grand elder from the Sima clan in Nine Serenities City. Even Sun Yifan would have responded with little more than a cold snort. After all, he was a high counselor to the Spirit Advent King, and would be well within his rights to scold a prince from Nine Serenities City. But in the current circumstances, both of them had little choice but to accept the treatment. Wording things carefully, Sima Dao said, "To be able to tamper with soul medicine and leave behind no evidence is a level of necromantic skill that neither of us has ever even heard of before. The only way it could be done is with some legendary secret magic of some sort or another." Although we weren't able to learn anything from the soul medicine itself, Sun Yifan added through gritted teeth, "we did come up with another clue. All of the soul medicine in question was purchased from our shops, and after looking into our records, Brother Sima and I were able to determine that over the course of the last month, we had quite a few suspicious customers." Bones aching with hatred, he pulled out a jade slip that he handed over to Zhou Hong. Zhou Hong's eyes flashed as he accepted it and looked it over. Then he rose to his feet and left to make various arrangements. Soon enough, the full power of the heir apparent of Nine Serenities City was on display as a massive investigation was carried out. Over the course of the following few days, clues were unearthed one by one. Although all of the suspicious people who had purchased the medicine were wearing disguises, Zhou Hong's network ran wide and deep. Soon, he uncovered the fact that on the day of the disaster, every person in that suspicious group had used Arch-Emperor City's teleportation portal to travel to Giant Ghost City. Soon, it was also uncovered that the entire group of people had originally teleported into Arch-Emperor City on the same day. Although the exact times were staggered, it was obvious that they were working together. "I don't care if I can't prove it directly, Bai Hao, I'm convinced that this was all you're doing." Anger burning, Zhou Hong gritted his teeth and sent messages to Sima Dao and Sun Yifan. Once Sima Dao and Sun Yifan got the news, their minds reeled, and their fury also began to rage. "You framed us, Bai Hao. How shameless, Bai Hao." The mere thought of Bai Xiaochun's act that day got their blood boiling, and they immediately rushed out of their shops and headed toward Bai Xiaochun's. After the recent disaster, Zhou Hong had spent a lot of time and resources smoothing things over. Unfortunately, business for Sima Dao and Sun Yifan had been seriously damaged, and few customers came their way. Thanks to the efforts of Zhou Hong, much of the news of the events in Burrow 89 and the surrounding areas had been stifled. And yet, it was impossible to prevent word from spreading completely. Nobody seemed interested at all in Sima Dao and Sun Yifan. In contrast, the way that Bai Xiaochun had taken action on the day of the disaster ensured that many people approved of him more than ever. Almost immediately, a steady stream of customers was flowing into his shop. The other shops in the area who had helped Bai Xiaochun also benefited, so whenever soul cultivators arrived wanting high-quality spirit enhancements, they would refer them to Bai Xiaochun's shop. Bai Xiaochun was doing business like crazy, even more so than when he had initially become popular. Bai Hao was constantly running around, busier than ever. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was very pleased with everything, especially with how perfectly the plan had been executed. Clearly, Bai Hao was very useful when it came to coming up with plots and schemes. Bai Xiaochun was currently in the back room of his shop, doing research into 17-colored flame. It was with great contentment that he went about researching 17-colored flame. Thanks to his several months of hard work, he now felt that he understood this type of flame much better than before. As of this point, there were only two main problem areas that, once he resolved, meant that he could formally start trying to conjure the flame. Suddenly, his eyebrows danced up and down with delight as he finally resolved the first of those main problem areas. Everything made sense now that the problem faded away. However, it was in that very moment that, out in the main part of the shop, Bai Hao let out a cry of alarm. Then, two rumbling sounds like thunder echoed into the shop from the street. The entire shop vibrated, and cracks even appeared in the walls and ceiling, as though the shop might collapse at any moment. Bai Xiaochun was instantly startled out of his good mood. Irritated, he burst out of the back room just as the angry voices of Sima Dao and Sun Yifan rang out. Get the hell out here, Bai Hao! Bai Hao, you contemptible rapscallion! You were the one who tampered with that soul medicine. How dare you slander our names? Things are not over between you and us. Their voices were so laced with rage that other shops in the area also began to tremble and vibrate. Everyone who heard the words being spoken were shocked, and looked over hesitantly. Bai Hao tampered with the soul medicine? Well, he certainly had the motive, but I don't think he's good enough to do something like that. Bai Xiaochun had originally been extremely irritated at having been interrupted, but then he heard the words being spoken, and his heart lurched with nervousness and guilt. Unfortunately, there was no time for thought or planning. He couldn't leave Bai Hao out there on his own. The shop was already in complete disarray. Thankfully, Bai Hao hadn't been hurt. However, Bai Xiaochun had put a lot of hard work into this shop, so to see someone else messing it up felt just the same as if someone had broken into his home. At this point, his anger began to burn. Eyes bloodshot, he shouted, so, repaying kindness with enmity, Sima Dao, Sun Yifan? You've ruined your reputations and now you're trying to drag me down with you? How despicable. If I hadn't stepped in during the disaster, you two might have lost your lives. I calmed everyone down and gave you time to explain yourselves. I'm the one who resolved the whole situation. If you don't want to show your appreciation, fine. But now you dare to slander me? You two are complete bullies. Bai Xiaochun made his voice as loud as possible, causing it to echo out clearly throughout the area. He was aware that it was possible that Sima Dao and Sun Yifan had actually come up with some clue to implicate him, and therefore, he decided to try to overawe them with an intimidating display. Sima Dao's fury grew hotter, and he retorted, Bai Hao, I what? Bai Xiaochun interrupted, glaring at him. When you opened up a shop right next to me in open competition, Sima Dao, did I ever ask you to stop? Did I ever go and threaten to tear it down? Did I ever curse you to your face? I accepted the humiliation silently. I swallowed my complaints. And why? Because I, Bai Hao, am a nobody here, and I didn't dare to provoke you. I didn't even do anything when you clearly tried to take advantage of how nice I was being. Even when you were in a really bad situation and I could have taken advantage of it, well, I have my bottom line, and I know that there are just some things I can't do. I couldn't just stand around and watch all of the other fellow Taoists from the other shops in the area get dragged into the situation, and that's why I helped you. But now, you actually come here to wrongly accuse me? Sima Dao, do you have no heart? If so, then dig open your chest to prove it. But if you do, then, how evil-hearted you are. Not only are you ungrateful, you are the type who oppresses the good and timid people in the world. You are completely and utterly selfish, and in fact, don't even qualify to speak a single word to me. Bai Xiaochun spoke with decisiveness that could sever nails and chop iron, in a manner as grand and lofty as the highest clouds in the sky. Bai Xiaochun's words were like a razor-sharp sword that cut deeply into Sima Dao. His face fell, and he was so shocked he took a few subconscious steps backward. Mind numb, he stared at Bai Xiaochun with the desire to respond. He even opened his mouth. And yet, not a word came out. Seeing how Sima Dao was trembling in shock because of Bai Xiaochun's words, Sun Yifan shouted, cut the crap, Bai Hao. You can just shut up this instant, Sun Yifan. Bai Xiaochun shot back. Do you really think that Lord Bai doesn't know that you and Sima Dao are as thick as thieves? You set up shop on either side of me, you villains. You had the backing of an heir apparent, and used your seniority as old-time necromancers to try to put me out of business. You know, there's a question I've been wanting to ask this whole time. Did I ever do anything to offend you? No, I didn't. For mere profit, you attempted to prevent me from making a living. Alright, fine, I can deal with that. But now you want to plant false evidence against me to try to earn your reputation back? Well, let me tell you, I have nothing to hide in anything, and I certainly don't fear evildoers like yourself. Bai Xiaochun's words were spoken with complete frankness, and flowed out as smooth as a river. They made Bai Xiaochun seem more impressive than ever, and caused both Sima Dao and Sun Yifan to freeze in place, their hearts pounding with anger, but unable to say anything in response. Everyone else in the area was surprised. This was their first time realizing how sharp-tongued this Bai Hao could be. It was almost as if his words were weapons, making this spectacle even more dazzling than an actual fight. Even Bai Hao was stunned. This was also his first time witnessing how glib his master could be, and it left him gaping with surprise. It was only now that he finally realized what it must have been like to see Bai Xiaochun during the Bai clan's ancestral ceremony. If words were swords, then speeches like this could kill. You. Sun Yifan was furious, and his mind was spinning, but he could hardly speak. Neither he nor Sima Dao were proficient in battles of words. Furthermore, to people like them, reputation was everything, and they had long since come to believe that as grandiose nascent soul experts, they couldn't possibly act like newbie cultivators who battled with words. And yet, here was Bai Hao, a nascent soul expert, an elite cultivator with shocking battle prowess, whose sharp words left them feeling completely helpless. Sima Dao was the first to recover. Gritting his teeth, he said, "At this point, Bai Hao, words are meaningless. It doesn't matter whether you admit it or not today. I challenge you to a duel. Not a duel of magical techniques, but a duel of flame conjuring. Whoever loses will get the hell out of Arch-Emperor City, and never conjure a single flame again for all time." At this point, Sun Yifan also recovered. He knew that the incident with the soul medicine was something very damaging that had to be recovered from. Right now, the most important way to go about doing that was to get revenge. If they could crush this Bai Hao once and for all, they could wipe away their disgrace, and slowly recover from the humiliation of recent days. With such thoughts on his mind, he shouted, "That's right, Bai Hao. I also challenge you to a duel. Since you're good enough to tamper with soul medicine, then let's see how good you actually are at flame conjuring." Bai Xiaochun's expression flickered slightly. If it were a competition of spirit enhancement, then as long as he had enough flame, he could be completely confident. However, Sima Dao and Sun Yifan were obviously aware that he had defeated Chen Shang in just such a competition, and that he could perform 15-fold spirit enhancements. Besides, when it came to spirit enhancement, because of how success rates worked, no one could ever be absolutely confident in winning. That was why they didn't mention spirit enhancement. And when all was said and done, necromancers also had to be proficient in the other skills of flame conjuring and soul medicine concocting. And because flame conjuring was how one went about concocting soul medicine, the foundation of everything came down to flame conjuring. However, Bai Xiaochun was not completely confident when it came to flame conjuring. At the moment, he still couldn't conjure 17-colored flame, and even had problems succeeding consistently with 16-colored flame. And thus, his expression flickered slightly. Although Sima Dao and Sun Yifan couldn't compete with Bai Xiaochun in a battle of words, they had both lived many years and experienced many things. As a result, they could instantly tell what he was thinking. Seeing that, Sima Dao added, "If we're going to compete, then we also need to have a little wager. The stakes are the right to stay in Arch-Emperor City. If you lose, you have to get the hell out of the city, never perform spirit enhancements again, and also give up your shop. If you win, then I'll hand my shop over to you, and mine as well," Sun Yifan said with a cold smile. "Since it's 2-on-1, we won't try to take advantage of you. If it's a wager you want, then I guess I'll have to gamble a bit," Bai Xiaochun said, clasping his hands behind his back and emphasizing his words with a cold harumph. As far as he was concerned, it didn't matter that Sun Yifan and Sima Dao were nascent soul cultivators. Bai Xiaochun had a heaven-down nascent soul, and had defeated over 100 top chosen. He had even come out victorious over the half-diva junior champion king. Considering all that, these two necromancers shouldn't be a problem at all. Just as he was contemplating whether or not to drive them away, Sima Dao apparently realized what he was thinking. If this Bai Hao wasn't already a legend for his bravery and ferocity, Sima Dao would have simply challenged him to a fight, instead of bringing up the matter of flame conjuring. But now that he could tell that Bai Xiaochun was contemplating escalating things to outright fighting, he knew he had to do something. "Bai Hao, you're a nascent soul necromancer, and a famous one at that. If you try to beat us up, we might not be able to fight back. But resorting to violence will only delay things today. And there will always be a tomorrow. Even if you don't agree to our challenge today, we'll come back a second time." Sima Dao had experienced a stroke of inspiration due to his nervousness, and it immediately caused Bai Xiaochun to frown. "Fine, Bai Hao," Sun Yifan jumped in, "I'll also put up 1 billion vengeful souls. If you win, you can have them all. Obviously, Sun Yifan had also realized that Bai Xiaochun wasn't completely confident when it came to flame conjuring, and that it was important to force him into the challenge no matter what. Sun Yifan had thought his plan out well. He knew that if he caused a big enough scene, and attracted enough attention, then if Bai Hao wanted to continue to do business in Arch-Emperor City, he would have to take the challenge seriously. And when it came to attracting attention from an audience, the best way to do it was offer huge stakes in a bet. It was exactly the same thing that had happened with Chen Xiao. And that was why he offered up 1 billion vengeful souls. As expected, his words caused an immediate stir. After all, 1 billion vengeful souls was a mind-boggling number. It was the same number that had propelled Bai Xiaochun to the rank of Major General back on the Great Wall. Even the true spirit back there had been completely shocked and moved by that number. Another shocking wager is taking place because of Bai Hao's shop. Last time it was 800 million portions of soul medicine, and this time it's 1 billion vengeful souls. This is monumental. There was already a clamor of conversation, and many people were excitedly taking out jade slips to send message to their friends. Meanwhile, Sima Dao realized what Sun Yifan was thinking. Gritting his teeth, he said, "I'll also throw in 1 billion vengeful souls." His words only served to throw oil onto the fire. Numerous cries of astonishment could be heard erupting from the crowd. Heavens! Another 1 billion, that's 2 billion vengeful souls. That number is staggering to even think about. This goes way past the 800 million portions of soul medicine. Hurry, this news is priceless. We have to spread word. More and more soul cultivators began sending messages to friends, and it didn't take long before all of Burrow 89 was shaken. Other surrounding boroughs were similarly affected. By this point, Bai Xiaochun's neighborhood, which had once been a relatively remote and out-of-the-way location, was now getting packed with excited crowds. When Bai Xiaochun looked around and saw that people were rushing into the area from all over, he suddenly felt a lot of pressure, and his eyes even turned a bit bloodshot. Looking back at Sima Dao and Sun Yifan, he realized that he had been backed into a corner. If he didn't accept the wager, then these two would be free to spread rumors about him tampering with their soul medicine, which would get the whole city mad at him. "Alright," he said through gritted teeth. "How are we going to do this?" Sima Dao chuckled coldly in his heart at how they had forced Bai Xiaochun's hand. Voice tranquil, he said, "We'll set a certain type of flame and a time limit. Whoever can conjure the most during that time will be the winner." "Brother Sun, Bai Hao, what do you think?" Generally speaking, there were two main types of competitions that would occur between necromancers. One was to see who could conjure the flame with the most colors, the other was to see who could conjure more flame in a given time period. The first type would show what overall level the necromancers had achieved, and the second would show how skilled they were in it. Although Sima Dao had come up with the idea for a competition on the spur of the moment, he had abundant life experience as a necromancer, and knew that, considering this Bai Hao could perform 15-fold spirit enhancements, he was obviously at the celestial rank, just like himself and Sun Yifan. He had never even considered that he could be an earthly necromancer. After all, the number of earthly necromancers who existed in the wildlands could be counted on one hand. Furthermore, they were the type of people who wandered from place to place and were rarely seen. Celestial necromancers couldn't conjure 18-colored flame. At most, they could handle 17-colored flame. Of course, even those who could only did it with difficulty, making that type of flame unsuitable for wagers. 16-colored flame was a different story, though. Sima Dao was very familiar with 16-colored flame, and could produce it quite consistently. Considering his level of experience and skill, he was very confident in being able to win a competition involving that type of flame. Sun Yifan was essentially thinking the same thing, and quickly nodded in response. "Let's compete in 16-colored flame," he said, smiling coldly inside. "How about this? We can all start from 1-colored flame and work up to 16-colored flame. Whoever can conjure 3 flames first will be the winner." Sima Dao laughed heartily. "Perfect. That's an even more simple method than the usual one. And fairer too. All of the fellow Taoists who are here to watch can serve as witnesses." Although they had made a show of giving Bai Xiaochun the option of giving an opinion, they had spoken so quickly that he had been given no such opportunity. And yet, nobody present was willing to point that out. After all, the method suggested by Sun Yifan was just as Sima Dao had said, very fair. The truth was that both Sima Dao and Sun Yifan were people who had been famous for years already, and had deep reserves of skill. In contrast, Bai Xiaochun was a newcomer to the necromancy scene, and nobody would think to describe him as being very skilled. Bai Xiaochun's heart thumped when he heard the details of the wager, and he immediately got a bad feeling. When it came to 15-colored flame, he was actually very confident. In fact, he could succeed with virtually 100% certainty. But 16-colored flame was different. Even with the improvements Bai Hao had made to the formula, he was still only capable of roughly a 30% success rate. Furthermore, he hadn't had the opportunity to discuss the matter of flame conjuring with anyone else besides Bai Hao. Although Bai Hao was skilled, not even he had ever been in much contact with other celestial necromancers. Therefore, not even he was sure of what success rates were common when it came to 16-colored flame. After all, success rates were not often discussed by necromancers with outsiders. Usually, they kept things like that a secret. Most other people in this situation would either bow their head in defeat or impulsively take the bet. But not Bai Xiaochun. He blinked a few times, then looked at Sun Yifan and Sima Dao and angrily said, "That's not a fair bet. I can only manage a 20% success rate with 16-colored flame. How am I supposed to win like that?" His words caused many jaws to drop in the audience. After all, many people had at least heard of the supposed success rates for 16-colored flame. Although none could be absolutely certain, they at least had a general idea. 20% success rate? Seems a bit exaggerated. 16-colored flame is one of the most advanced forms of multicolored flame, and has a very low success rate. Only earthly necromancers can produce it consistently. Celestial necromancers are all different, but for the most part, they can't make it very easily. As the audience chattered, Sima Dao threw his head back and laughed sarcastically. "Nice try, Bai Hao. To tell you the truth, I only have a 12.5% success rate when it comes to 16-colored flame. Brother Sun is a bit more adept than me, but even he can't get past 15%. Sounding utterly serious, Sun Yifan said, "If you can manage a 20% success rate, then you don't have to worry at all. You'll definitely win." With that, he looked at Bai Xiaochun as if to say, "What, did you really think that was going to scare us or something?" "Fine, you're on," Bai Xiaochun said, eyes glittering. Bai Xiaochun's comportment immediately caused Sun Yifan and Sima Dao to hesitate, and even exchange glances. Although it seemed like he was simply trying to put on a brave front, they were now more on guard than before. The truth was that Sima Dao had actually held back a bit of the truth. Both he and Sun Yifan could achieve success rates of nearly 17%. In fact, if they got lucky they could sometimes reach 20%. However, that was the limit for a celestial necromancer when working with 16-colored flame. The only exception would be, if they managed to improve the formula they worked with. But doing something like that was incredibly difficult. All necromancers in the wildlands knew that even earthly necromancers who tried to alter flame conjuring formulas would have to spend a huge amount of time and energy to do so, and even then might not succeed. After all, the current formulas had been derived by constant refining and augmentation from generation to generation. Countless tests and confirmations ensured that the current formulas were the most reliable. Considering all of that, Sima Dao and Sun Yifan calmed themselves, and immediately called for help to set up a competition arena in front of the three shops. It wasn't a large arena, and had just enough space for the three of them to do their work. In that short time, however, so many soul cultivators showed up that there were now row upon row of them waiting to watch what would happen. There were even people floating in the air to observe. By now, there were definitely more than 100,000 people present, with more beams of light appeared every moment. The city guard was shocked, and immediately dispatched a few hundred people to make sure that order was kept. Zhou Hong was present, of course, as were Little Wolf God, Li Tiansheng, Miao Liner, and even the second prince. Virtually all of the chosen that Bai Xiaochun had kidnapped in the necromancer kettle had arrived. There were also other chosen and heirs to the noble and aristocratic houses, people like Chen Shang who hadn't been in the necromancer kettle. Everybody came to watch and comment on Bai Xiaochun's performance. This competition was already sizing up to be much bigger than the previous one. Not only was the audience larger, but the fact that there were so many chosen present got everyone else in the audience even more excited. Chen Manyao was also there, alone in the crowd and away from the second prince and the other chosen. She stood there by herself, quietly watching Bai Xiaochun. To see so many people crowded together watching him made Bai Xiaochun a little nervous. Although he was capable of a 30% success rate with 16-colored flame, that still didn't leave him completely confident. And yet, there was nothing else he could do. Too bad we can't compete in 15-colored flame, he thought. Although he wasn't feeling very confident, he had to brace himself and hope that Sima Dao and Sun Yifan weren't capable of much more than 15% or so. Bai Xiaochun's visible nervousness caused Sima Dao and Sun Yifan to feel more relaxed than ever. They sat cross-legged on either side of him, meditating to settle their chi and clear their minds. Before long, the audience started to quiet down. Zhou Hong hovered in the air above them, eyes flashing. After casting a brief glance at Bai Xiaochun, he loudly announced, "It is a great honor to have been invited here today by Grandmaster Sima and Grandmaster Sun, to preside over this competition of flame conjuring." Very well, enough with the introductions. Let the competition begin. As his words rang out, countless eyes came to focus on the competition area and the three necromancers sitting there. The eyes of both Sima Dao and Sun Yifan snapped open, and without the slightest hesitation, they casually performed double-handed incantation gestures, causing soul-hoarding pagodas to fly out of their bags of holding. Then, with the wave of a finger, they each summoned hordes of vengeful souls. Neither of them delayed in the least bit. They began their conjuring work, creating something from nothing as they started with one colored flame, which would be the foundation upon which they worked all the way up to 16 colored flame. They were clearly both very familiar with the process. They were both celestial necromancers with significant skill sets, and that was fully on display right here. Both of them had suffered severe blows to their reputation recently, and knew that this wager was critical to repairing some of that damage. Therefore, neither of them held back at all. Within the space of a few breaths of time, both of them closed their fingers down, then almost simultaneously, opened them again to reveal tongues of one-colored flame. Of course, Bai Xiaochun had also produced his soul-hoarding pagoda as soon as Zhou Hong officially began the competition, and he was no slower than Sun Yifan and Sima Dao. In the end, all three of them produced a tongue of one-colored flame at the same time. Everyone watching the competition was stunned. It only took them a few breaths of time to produce a one-colored flame. They clearly deserve to be called Grandmasters, and definitely deserve to be celestial necromancers. Neither Sun Yifan nor Sima Dao revealed any reaction to what had just occurred. They knew that since this Bai Hao was in the celestial rank, he must be very familiar with the process of conjuring one-colored flame. Were he not, then he wouldn't deserve to be their opponent. Soon, all three of them were at work again, producing 2, 3, 4. All the way to 10 colored flame. The entire time, they all seemed to be racing neck and neck. The fact that they were all keeping the same pace was a bit worrisome to Sun Yifan and Sima Dao, and yet, at the moment, all it did was cause their hearts to tremble slightly. Next came 11, 12, and 13 colored flame. When Sun Yifan and Sima Dao saw that Bai Xiaochun was still keeping pace, serious expressions appeared in their eyes. Everyone in the audience watched with bated breath, their hearts pounding. It wasn't that the onlookers had never seen people conjuring flame before. In fact, many in the audience were necromancers themselves. However, it was not an everyday occasion to be able to see celestial necromancers conjuring flame. Considering that most earthly necromancers were wanderers who nobody ever encountered, that meant that celestial necromancers were the ostensible peak of the necromancy world. Celestial necromancers are terrifying. They went from 1 to 13 colored flame with ease. And the speed. Furthermore, all three of them seemed to be on almost exactly the same level. Hey, these three are definitely not ordinary celestial necromancers. They're all at the very peak of their rank. I feel like my eyes have been opened. Just watching them work is beneficial. I've already resolved a few areas I had problems with in the past. Bai Xiaochun ignored all of the discussions. He was now completely immersed in the flame conjuring, and sparing no effort in the process. Usually, he preferred to have all of the variables under control when he worked, but this time, he had no such luxury. The only thing he could do was maintain complete focus in the hopes that he wouldn't lose. Sun Yifan and Sima Dao were equally focused on their work, and completely ignored the crowd. Currently, they were now working on 14 colored flame, and couldn't afford any distractions. Moments later, it was for the first time that the audience saw a difference between the three necromancers. Although the methods used by Sun Yifan and Sima Dao varied slightly, they were mostly the same, and followed the prescribed pattern everyone was used to. Sima Dao followed the soul ratios precisely, and Sun Yifan mostly ignored the sea of fire, and focused on feeding the souls into it. Occasionally, ripples of multicolored light would glow off of them, which came from the flame-conjuring secret magics that they employed to increase their speed. However, Bai Xiaochun's method of conjuring 14-colored flame was completely different. He used the 13-colored flame to consume all of the tens of thousands of vengeful souls in one moment, which caused gasps to rise up in the audience. Bai Hao's conjuring methods are unprecedented. He fed tens of thousands of vengeful souls into the fire at once. Isn't he worried that the tongue of flame will collapse? However, it was to everyone's wide-eyed shock that, not only did Bai Xiaochun's flame not destabilize, but it actually grew stronger. Furthermore, because of how he fed all the souls in at once, his speed greatly surpassed the secret magics used by Sun Yifan and Sima Dao. This time, the three necromancers didn't all finish at the same time. However, the disparity wasn't very dramatic, they all finished within roughly 10 breaths of time of each other. After the 14-colored flame appeared, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath to calm himself. Not even bothering to look around, he continued with his work, sending vast amounts of vengeful souls out to be consumed by the sea of fire. Gradually, his 14-colored flame rose to the level of a 15-colored flame. After Bai Xiaochun's flame appeared, Sun Yifan and Sima Dao succeeded as well. By this point, the pressure was on the other two necromancers, as they had to admit that Bai Xiaochun's abilities in flame conjuring were unique and shocking. Expressions flickering as they contemplated what was at stake, they exchanged a glance. However, that was when they found to their shock that Bai Xiaochun hadn't stopped, he was going on directly to 16-colored flame. This Bai Hao is too young and inexperienced. That's not the way to go about conjuring. You need to get plenty of 15-colored flames built up, that way your chances of success will increase. We're definitely going to win. Exchanging a smile, Sun Yifan and Sima Dao felt more confident than ever. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.